Don't lose sight of your humanity in the pursuit of a fancier car. The hard conversations. Part of working well in any group is the ability to have hard conversations. It's easy to avoid having conversations that deeply go into your feelings and tough issues. Ironically, avoiding hard conversations usually makes things worse, not better. Properly conducted, hard conversations vastly improve matters and can totally change the atmosphere in a positive way. I have found this to be the case, both at work and at home. If one person takes the initiative, others usually follow. It's easy. All you have to do is say how you feel and what your concerns are, and make sure you aren't attacking the person. I still recall the feelings of excitement and positive group cohesion 30 years ago when, at a faculty meeting, the design division got up the nerve to tell our youngest faculty member that we wanted him to leave. It was clear he would never complete his PhD thesis if he continued working at Stanford as a lecturer. Everyone, including the person we were dismissing, spoke openly and from the heart. I have found over and over again that if one person speaks from the heart, others follow, and the group's feelings of community and commitment increase tremendously. On the other hand, if the discussions remain on a superficial and impersonal level, the feelings of frustration and alienation abound. Sociologists speak of realistic and non-realistic conflicts. A realistic conflict is a disagreement that is goal-oriented. That is to say, it's about something specific that the conflicting parties need to resolve. When such conflicts arise in well-functioning relationships, their resolution can lead to progress toward the goal. A non-realistic conflict is, at heart, about something other than what is being talked about. Its primary purpose, for at least one of the participants, is to discharge tension. It's not really about the goal of solving a problem. Such conflicts arise when there isn't real mutuality in the group. Instead, there is a pseudo-mutuality, wherein people pretend their relationship to the others is something that it isn't. They may be hiding a poor self-image or a sense of exclusion or jealousy. Whatever its root causes, they are suffering discomfort that builds up tensions. In provoking a non-realistic conflict, they are seeking a temporary discharge of their built-up tensions. Unless something is done about the root causes of the tension, such conflicts can only put a temporary band-aid on a bad situation. Good communication skills affect every area of your life. They can mean the difference between getting a job and not getting it, making an important connection with someone or not, and surviving public crises without too much damage to your reputation or becoming persona non grata. We elect presidents based more on their communication style than anything else. We value people who communicate openly and honestly, and we avoid people who don't pick up on social cues that we don't want to be cornered or kept on the phone for a half hour. The best communicator isn't necessarily the person who knows the fanciest words. It's the person who pays attention and makes others know that they've been heard. Group Habits. Chapter 7. Conversation while being driven in New York City by my friend Harold. Me. Harold, why don't you use your turn signals? Harold. I don't like strangers to know my business. Belonging to groups gives us an important way to express our humanity. Most of us are affiliated with many groups. In addition to family, we have groups of friends, professional, political, health, and school groups, and so on. The way you interact within those groups can change the way you feel about each situation, and can enrich or screw up your life. In this chapter, we'll talk about making productive changes in your teamwork, physical space, body language, and communication to make groups work better for you. Working in teams. In my teaching and administrative roles as the academic director of the D School, most of my day is filled with different group experiences. In the D School, all classes must be team-taught. The way we do team teaching is different from any other team-taught courses at Stanford. We expect that the entire teaching team be present at every class and always be ready to participate. Although there have been some remarkable exceptions, most other entities at Stanford treat team teaching as a relay race. Each person does his run, then hands off the baton to the next person, leaving the race. We feel that if every member of the teaching team is participating, the students get a richer experience. My colleague Jim Adams loves this kind of teaching. He tells me, "I like team teaching so we teachers can trash talk each other, thereby giving the students a better insight into professors as people and the nature of their world." Unfortunately, most of my colleagues are not at Jim's level of enlightenment regarding the virtues of trash talk. Still, it does benefit everyone to have different viewpoints in the same room. An iconic example of the benefits of team teaching occurred when I received a phone call from Bill on the evening of our first class session. He and I were part of the teaching team for the class Transformative Design. I was thrilled to be working with Bill because he was one of my closest friends, a world-class designer who had designed the first laptop computer, and one of the 3 people who had founded the design consultancy IDEO. The phone conversation went as follows. Bill: "I was wondering what you thought about our class this afternoon." Me: "I thought it was great. What did you think?" "Yes, I liked it." "Great. Do me a favor. Next time, give me your PowerPoint slides the evening before the class." "You already know what I'm going to say. Why do you need them?" "It's not the content. I want to fix your fonts." "Are you kidding?" "No." 2 evenings later, Bill and his wife Karen were at my house for dinner. I showed my PowerPoint slides to our wives. They are both designers and have great aesthetic sensibilities. They humored me by agreeing that my fonts were not bad. However, I knew Bill was right. I had sinned in multiple ways. He proceeded to point out the defects. Too many font styles, too many different font sizes, no consistency of style, and, worst of all, I had not used the official D-School font. As soon as he finished, Karen dubbed Bill the Font Nazi. We all had a good laugh. The next week I, of course, told the story to the class. That incident provided me with a mantra for the rest of the term, which was, "Fix up your fonts, or Bill will get on your case." It was all in good fun. A powerful lesson lies behind this incident, however. I was trained as an engineer. I am used to worrying primarily about the content. Bill was trained as a designer. Bad aesthetics made him viscerally upset. If I were teaching the class alone, the students would never have been exposed to the sensibility that Bill brought with him so naturally. The sharing of sensibilities and different points of view enrich the educational experience for students and for teachers, and this occurs when we bring teachers from different backgrounds into the same classroom. Needless to say, Bill prepared all the future PowerPoint slides, handouts, and web postings for the class. Everything was elegantly done in the same style, using the official D-School font. I never fully recovered. Every time I look at fonts, I fondly remember Bill. I also curse him for all the extra time and effort I now put in, struggling to get my presentations close to his minimal level of acceptance. Student teams. We also require teamwork from the students. Most of our courses are based on project work from interdisciplinary student teams. We generally don't impose any structure on the ways student teams organize themselves. Again, this is different from the mainstream. Many other academic units dictate team structure and assign different responsibilities to the students within the team. Much of the faculty mentality that team members should be assigned specific roles seems to me to be analogous to what happened to me in the 3rd grade when the teacher assigned a structure, thinking it would train us for the real world. In fact, it had the effect of deadening initiative, discouraging us from learning the skills we needed to be responsible and flexible enough to find the appropriate structure for each specific situation. Sharing a project requires a set of skills that are different from those used when working alone. Everything discussed in the Conversations section of Chapter 6 is applicable to teamwork. In addition, there is the added dynamic of multiple players. Generally, the students are organized into groups of about 4, so it's possible for there to be various splits in the way students handle conflict. We sometimes get 3 against 1, or 1 against 3. We sometimes get 2 pairs, and sometimes 1 pair and 2 singles, or, in the worst case, 4 singles. Remarkably, most teams work out well, and conflicts usually get resolved in productive ways. We actually have a professional psychologist on staff. We call him the D-Shrink. And he promotes the idea that open communication leads to much better team performance. There are various theories on how to compose teams to match different personality and skill types. I find that the most important thing to be learned from studying about different personality types is the visceral acceptance of the fact that basic differences exist between people. People are different because they have different academic majors, and because they also have different styles for learning and doing things. Each person needs to know that his way is not necessarily the only right way. This will serve him both on the job and in the family. You know by now how much I like jokes, right? Well, during a court case, after listening to the plaintiff, the judge says, "You're right." The defendant gets excited and says to the judge, "But, Your Honor, what really happened was..." And the judge then says to the defendant, "You're right." Hearing this, a spectator in the courtroom says, "Wait a minute, Your Honor, they can't both be right." The judge responds, saying, "You're right." The point here is that seemingly contradictory things can all be correct. Most real-world activities are not zero-sum games. Ways can be found in which everyone, and especially the team, moves forward. If it's done out of respect and caring, controversy is not a bad thing. It can even be a good thing. It's important that the controversy not get personal and damage the team's sense of mutual support and understanding. It's also important that everyone on the team have an intention to make things work. Things go awry when people have different levels of commitment and different goals for the team. When things do not go well, it's easy for some team members to become self-righteous. It is good to know the truth, and it is good to know that the truth in itself does not dictate any specific action. As was pointed out in Chapter 1, you give everything its meaning. So lighten up and assist the team to get the job done. Constructive criticism. In our workshops, we have adopted a system for criticism that I originally learned from the late George M. Prince in a Synectics workshop. The idea is to give criticism in a supportive way that promotes positive evolution of the student's work by saying 2 "I like" statements followed by 1 "I wish" statements. For example, I might say, "I like the way you took into account concerns about safety, and I like the way it looks." Then after a short pause, I would continue, "I wish we could find a way to make it smaller." The first thing to notice about this feedback is that there is no "but" between the "I like" and the "I wish." They are separated by only a short pause, nothing else. The second thing to notice is that "I wish" is said in a way that encourages further refinement in a positive way. It enlists everyone who hears the comment, including the commentator, to work on figuring out a solution. The way not to say it would be, "It will not work, you made it too big." This is a blocking kind of statement, whereas the "I wish" version says, "Yes, and." This system for criticism of student work was used for many years in our product design program. Now it has become a fixture in the D-School, where it is used for feedback to and from students. This type of evaluation is, in theory, done after each class session by the teaching team and by any students who wish to participate. In addition, sessions involving the entire class and teaching team are done during class every few weeks. Based on this, changes are made both to subsequent classes and future course offerings. The current version of the "I like, I wish" system does not limit the order or number of these statements. Sometimes a group does all the "I likes" first, followed by all the "I wishes." A modified version has been introduced by people who don't follow the original idea behind the "I wish." They use the "I wish" simply to state something they would like to change, without suggesting a direction for improvement. Then they add a third set of items given in the form of "what if." These serve the function of the problem-solving aspect of the original use of "I wish." Under this newer version, we might get feedback such as, "I liked meeting as a group," or "I wish we spent more time in our group." And then, "What if we met after class?" Personally, I am more comfortable with the original "I like, I wish" version when it comes to criticizing students' work. The "I wish" version works well when it's used to suggest areas for improvement, and has a positive pull similar to the question, "How might we?" Both "I wish there was a way to accomplish blank" and "How might we accomplish blank" are good ways to get people to move forward in a proactive problem-solving frame of mind. Regardless of the version used, this feedback mechanism is effective. It's invaluable in the D-School's quest for continual improvement in teaching. The students and teaching team like it, and it adds a feeling of community to the class. The same tool can be profitably used for constructive criticism in many situations. It is certainly not limited to student work or to academia. It can be usefully applied to both your personal and your professional lives. We once had a senior member of the teaching team who had never before taught at the D-School and was used to the formal European academic tradition. At the end of the first class session, one of the Stanford professors explained to him that it was our custom to gather for an "I like, I wish" feedback session, and he agreed to join. However, when he realized that the session would also include students, he was taken aback. The idea of students telling him what they did not like seemed audacious to him. Still, he was a good sport and toughed it out. After a few such sessions, he became such a big enthusiast that when a class ran a little long and the other teaching team members wanted to forego the feedback session, he was the one who insisted they follow through with it. Styles and Cultures. My wife Ruth's book club agreed to read an early version of the manuscript for this book. One of the members, Marcia, sent me an email thanking me and telling me she liked what she had read. However, the "your turn" exercises scared her. That surprised me. "What about shy people?" she asked. That struck a note in me. It also brought back a terrible memory I had suppressed, probably my worst teaching error. I was teaching a graduate class on designing mechanical devices. That day we were covering a set of parts called a 4-bar mechanism. I had assigned students to find mechanical devices in their environments and to take turns in front of the class presenting an analysis relating what they found to what we were studying. The presentations went along well until one student did a presentation without regard to the vocabulary we had been using in class. I pointed at her projected diagram, showing a 4-bar mechanism operating the tail flap on an airplane, and asked her what that was called. She did not answer. I got angry and blurted out, "This is the 5th week of class. It is inconceivable to me that you would not be able to identify a 4-bar mechanism. We have been talking about them twice weekly since the first class. Where have you been?" The woman did not say a word. She left in tears and never returned. She was from China, and it was especially humiliating to her that I had caused her to lose face in front of the entire class. As soon as I realized what I had done, I felt terrible. Week after week, I hoped she would return. To this day, I regret that I did not reach out and contact her. 2 years later, she showed up in a class I was co-teaching with Sherry Shepherd, designed to be supportive of women graduate students. Sherry was the only female professor in Stanford's Department of Mechanical Engineering at that time. We used some of the techniques presented in this book, and the class passed without incident. I noticed for the first time, however, how very shy this student was. I finally realized what a frightening experience being in front of the design class must have been. At the final feedback session, this student told me, "You were much nicer in this class than the last one." It relieved a bit of the guilt I carried from my previous insensitivity to her shyness. We have many foreign students at Stanford. Some come from cultures that are fairly aggressive, and they tend to fit right in. Many others come from cultures where students are taught to be passive receivers of knowledge and to consider faculty as unapproachable, almost as deities. For such students, and for naturally shy American students, the Silicon Valley culture can be especially trying. Behaviors such as self-promotion, group work, approaching strangers, seeking assistance, meeting with an instructor during office hours, and speaking up in class can be difficult for them. Nowadays, with people working, studying, and living in countries that were foreign to their forebears, analogous cultural difficulties exist in many parts of the world. This situation is especially worthy of attention when you have people from another culture who were born in your country or who speak your language. You must not assume that just because someone speaks your language well, she is comfortable with your culture. In interacting with others, it is important to look for the outliers and take into account their discomfort with what may seem very natural to you. Outliers can occur at both ends of the spectrum. I had a PhD student from Shanghai who was most unusual. In those days, before the economic upswing, most students from the People's Republic of China were supported by their government and lived frugally, worked diligently, and used bicycles or walked. They saved what money they could get to buy things to take back home. This young man did not fit the mold. He bought a car during his first few months. Then he started not showing up for our weekly meetings. When he did appear, I was not impressed by his output. I gave this student several minor reprimands, yet his behavior remained spotty. Finally, I'd had enough. Even though a close colleague in Shanghai had recommended him to me, it was time to end the relationship. I told him that I did not want to continue to work with him, and he should find another thesis advisor. He astounded me by telling me it was not fair to dismiss him in this manner. I asked him what he thought would be fair. He suggested a point system similar to that used by the Department of Motor Vehicles. Each offense has a specific number of points associated with it, and you lose your license only if your total exceeds a certain number of points. This was too amusing to turn down. We agreed on a system of points. Amazingly, he shaped up immediately after our agreement and never got close to having his license suspended. He finished in a reasonable time with a good thesis. After graduation, he found a job on the East Coast, got married, had a child, and never went home to China. On the other end of this spectrum, I find that when I go abroad, I am often the outlier. It takes a little courage to introduce a bit of interactive California teaching style. Once I was with a classroom of students in a regional college near Mumbai. After I worked hard to break the ice for about 40 minutes, I got the students to open up and we had a nice interaction going. The director walked in and, after a few minutes of observation, decided he would help me. He loudly announced, "I request you do not interrupt the professor until after the lecture." If looks could kill. In any group setting, it's important to realize that not everyone thinks like you do, whether because of cultural differences or just differences in style. Aim to understand each other's communication preferences and learn from each other. When was the last time you... I have often had the experience that after students miss a class, they come to me for the lecture notes. My style is to lecture extemporaneously, so I don't really have a set of lecture notes to give the student. Instead, I've proposed what seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable alternative. I suggest that the students copy a classmate's notes, go over them, and then come to me to discuss anything they feel unclear about. Often it turns out that the students don't know anyone else in the class, and they're not sure who to ask about borrowing notes. It's as though students in the same class are ships in the night, passing each other with just enough recognition to avoid collision. My urge to assist students in breaking through this veil of anonymity was one of the factors that led me to create courses in which students interact with each other. In this context, I devised an exercise that has been very effective in getting people to connect. This connection helps to break through the ships in the night phenomenon of people being in the same environment and not connecting. Airplane travel has evolved into a classic example of people spending hours together, including sleeping next to one another, without communicating. An effective group icebreaker is to divide the class into pairs in which each tells the other what type of person she is. This provides good experience in both talking and listening. The students then are asked to relate what they heard about their partner to a different group of partners. This is a good way for us to discover how poorly we listen and how little we remember. After the first introductions, a great way to connect with a large group is to form circles of 6 to 8 people and have them each take turns completing the same sentence. The sentences I use always begin with, "The last time I..." After everyone has completed his response to a given sentence, I introduce the next sentence to the group. This time a different person goes first, and when this round is completed, a new person begins the next sentence. I use a different human experience for each round. They thus end up completing sentences such as, the last time I laughed was, the last time I cried was, the last time I had trouble sleeping was, the last time I did a good deed was, the last time I got angry was, the last time I did something brilliant was, the last time I did something stupid was, the last time I had a mystical experience was, the last time I stole something was, the last time I lied was, the last time I thought about suicide was, and finally, the last time I felt love was. I have found this technique also works well with groups in settings outside the university. This is a very effective exercise on several levels. It gets people to find out a little bit about each other and to start to form connections with others in the group. It's also a way for people to see that we all share a common basis of experience. We all laugh, cry, lose sleep at night, and do things we are proud of, things we are not proud of, things we regret, and things we are ashamed of. That is all part of the human experience. We often hide parts of ourselves because we feel others would not understand or would disapprove. We are sure they don't do similar things. My experience is that students from all over the world have had similar emotional experiences. After all, we are all human. It goes a long way toward establishing trust when students tell their stories to each other. I arrange the room so that I don't hear the stories that go with the responses. I do this to emphasize that this is a student-to-student sharing experience. It always turns out that the more you reveal about yourself, the more people like you. It's ironic that we hide aspects of ourselves because we fear rejection. It's the hiding, not the revealing, that leads to rejection. Your turn. Apply these same ideas in a private conversation. Next time you're having a leisurely conversation, tell your acquaintance what type of person you think you are, and then ask her to tell you about herself. Then go on to share the last time you could not sleep all night, and ask your partner when that happened to her. From there, start trading stories about the last time you had a good laugh, the last time you made a bad mistake, and so on. At the end, notice how your relationship with the other person has been altered by the details you shared. The name game. Some people identify strongly with their names, others hate their names, and many others are more or less neutral in their feelings. I have asked students to rate their feelings about their names on a scale from 1 to 10. I've gotten ratings all along the scale. I used to do a class exercise in which I asked the students to shut their eyes and think about the name that best describes who they are. Or if they feel they already have the correct name, to pick another one that just feels good. Then I asked them to mill around and interact with each other, staying in the persona that their new name implies to them. This is an interesting way to briefly try out changing your skin. If you're not happy with your given name, it's relatively easy to do something about it, either legally or simply by choosing to go by a name other than what's on your official documents. Some people purposefully distort the pronunciation of their names to hide or downplay their ethnic origins, while others insist on an authentic ethnic pronunciation that seems exaggerated to outsiders. Choosing a less ethnic name is most commonly seen in show business. However, it also happens in the general workforce. A man named Jose Zamora reported that he was sending out hundreds of resumes and getting no responses until he removed one letter from his name and became Joe. It's terribly unfair, yet experiments have consistently proven that applicants with Latino names and black-sounding names, such as Lakeisha Washington or Jamal Jones, don't get called for interviews nearly as much as those with white-sounding names, such as Emily Walsh or Brendan Baker. People's relationships to their names are complicated. It's best not to assume anything. One thing is for sure, if you use someone's name, you take the relationship to a different level than when you do not. Many people mistakenly believe they have trouble remembering names. I've always found there is a lack of intention and attention underneath their defeatist attitude. People take the time in some groups to have each person say her name aloud. This method seldom gets the names learned, and it is more a pretense than an actual taking of responsibility for the name issue. Name tags are a common tool for avoiding the issue of really dealing with names. It's easy with name tags to pretend that people know each other's names. If we really want to handle learning people's names in groups, there are many ways to proceed. One is to break into subgroups of 2 people and then build up from there. The trick is to get something memorable from each partner. An easy way to do this is to come up with something unusual that you both share. This serves as a hook. For anything, including a name, to be remembered, it must be dwelled upon and repeated. Thus, when you and your partner join another pair, you should introduce each other to the new pair and give them the hook that you both share. You can keep enlarging the group size and get everyone to repeat each person's name and the hook that goes with the name. For groups of 30 or less, I prefer to deal directly with the entire group, having everyone stand in a circle and each person say his or her name in turn. In the low-stress version, the students repeat in unison the name they just heard. In the high-stress version, each person takes a turn and gives his name and the names of all the people who have gone before him. The exercise can, in both cases, become more fun, and the names get easier to remember. They become stickier. If, in addition to his name, the student also simultaneously introduces himself with a whole-body physical gesture, then the others repeat both the name and the gesture. The gesture is easy to remember, and it makes the name easier to remember. It is useful to reinforce this learning by giving each person a list of the names to take home, and if possible, also photos. For subsequent group meetings, I have photos and names posted in the room for easy reference. Regardless of what we do in the group, I always assign myself the homework of learning names as soon as practicable, usually by the second meeting. Many teachers never learn their students' names. I never used to. Why bother? Now I realize that I just didn't want to devote any effort to it. I thought that if it didn't happen automatically, it was because I didn't have the ability. In reality, it has nothing to do with ability. It is a classic case of not giving the required attention to carrying out the intention. This is a sure way to develop a non-achievement habit. People who perform prodigious feats of memorizing go through all sorts of special efforts to pay attention to what they are memorizing. They know you cannot memorize something without giving it particular attention. It is mindfulness, rather than brain structure, that differentiates them from us. On the other hand, you can assist others to remember your name. If you add a memorable hook when you introduce yourself, your name becomes easier to remember. People with difficult names also help others greatly by spelling their names. Even simple names can often be confusing. When I say my last name, people sometimes hear Ross rather than Roth. So I always spell it when I say it to strangers or over the phone. Using names transforms relationships. I should have learned this years ago from my wife's college biology teacher, who memorized all the students' names before the first day of class. My wife immediately fell in love with him, as did many of his other students. To this day, 59 years later, she still carries a crush. Knowing names connects people at a much more satisfying level. Who's in charge? When people work in groups, the question of leadership arises. The issue of who leads and how the group is led can be spoken or unspoken, formal or informal. Much has been written about leadership and leadership styles. Growing up in America, I was brainwashed to believe that every organization needs a formal structure with a leader on top. When I was in the 3rd grade, the first thing we did when the teacher had us form a group was to elect a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. It was my teacher's way of preparing us for good citizenship. Nobody seemed to notice that the structure was functionally meaningless. In the 6th grade, we elected a mayor of our school. My friend Seymour was elected mayor of Public School 96 in the Bronx. And because I had mimeographed his election posters, he appointed me police commissioner. I guess it was good training for the real world, because I do remember using my high office to cover up my crimes such as tardiness and truancy. In retrospect, these two experiences did more to brainwash me into believing we all need to work in a hierarchy than they did to make me into a contributing, self-actualized citizen. My experience at Stanford, regarding leadership, working with groups of colleagues and with groups of students, has been remarkable and somewhat atypical. Originally, I was a member of the Mechanical Engineering Department, which had about 25 faculty members grouped into 3 divisions. I was a member of the Design Division. The chairman chose a director for each of the 3 divisions. This was an efficient arrangement because he only had to deal with 3 professors instead of all 25. Most of the faculty members were content because someone else was doing their division's administrative work, and they could devote their time to their own research and teaching. However, I started to notice defects in the organizational structure as my career developed. The chairman could easily influence the division director's behavior because he had a lot of control over the assets he allocated to them. If they were young, he also had a lot of control over their future careers. When tough issues came up, I felt that division directors were at times in a position where their own personal interests opposed those of the individuals they were representing. Furthermore, the directors were often not capable of truly representing the other members of their division. In the design division, the situation came to a head when the director at that time took a leave, and he and the department chairman, without consulting the faculty in the division, attempted to install an unsuitable replacement. It was the mid-1970s, and people were reconsidering many things within the social order. It was a time of student unrest, social protest, and the questioning of traditional societal structures and values. At that time, the design division had 8 faculty members, and we unanimously decided to restructure our group to operate as a flat organization without a director. The department chairman raised many objections to our new structure. In rebutting the objections, I came to fully realize what a potentially powerful new form we had created. We had a good idea. That structure has been thriving for 40 years, and the design division is now much more successful than it ever was. Our new structure hinged on an hour-long weekly meeting, open to all design division faculty and staff. The meeting had no chairperson. We simply went around the table, taking turns bringing up any issues that required the division's decision, reporting on past happenings, and announcing future events. We operated by consensus and negotiation, almost never voting on anything. There was almost no acrimony, and people treated each other with respect, collegiality, and a spirit of shared purpose and commitment. We'd rarely had meetings with each other before this reorganization. Nobody but the director knew what was going on, and people took little or no responsibility for the commons. Under the new system, there was a major transformation, and it was very exciting. We were all in charge, and we all wanted to make it work. When we started, the department chairman's main objections were based on the idea that there would not be one director to represent the division's interests to the chair, and that we would be unmanageable. It turned out to be just the opposite. We now had the most powerful form of organization in the department because we were a large group of people with one voice. It was impossible for the chairman or the dean to buy one person off. There were now 8 faculty members behind each issue. If one of us had trouble getting promoted, a salary issue, or anything else that required support, we could send 8 people, or any subset, to meet with the chairman or the dean. It was a powerful new model that allowed for the traditional single director structure as one of its forms. If needed, we could appoint someone director for a day. We actually never did that. We chose to divide up the jobs and rotate among them in order to be efficient and to make it easy for others to deal with us. One of us was responsible for the finances. Another handled course scheduling. Another represented us at the chairman's weekly meeting with the other division's directors. Yet another person dealt with staff issues, and the dreariest position of all went to the person who dealt with office and classroom space. To compensate, we decided to let him have the exalted title of Space Czar. All these jobs were regularly rotated, and new positions were created on an as-needed basis. We all had an equal voice. Those who cared most about an issue took on the leadership to get it handled. If nobody cared, We didn't do much about that issue until someone wanted it resolved. The new system went a long way toward creating a unique and strong culture. Interestingly, whenever we acquired new faculty, by virtue of expansion or to replace people who retired or left for other reasons, they quickly adapted to become fully contributing members to this unique group. We have made some slight modifications to our meetings over the years. We now have a student representative at each meeting, and the non-teaching staff attend every other meeting. We have also added a second hour to allow for philosophical discussions. I have developed a lot of respect for the power of flat organizations by virtue of my 40 years of experience in the high-functioning design division. Furthermore, it has led me to believe that the role of many high executives is overrated. Executives tend to get credit for anything that happens on their watch. It often means they get credit they do not deserve, and the hierarchical organizational system seems more effective than it really is. I remember the resume of a design division director who left for a more exalted administrative position at another university. The section listing his administrative achievements showed that, during his directorship, the design division budget had tripled. He neglected to mention that the entire increase was due to research grants the faculty had obtained, and that he had had absolutely no part in either raising or spending the money. I don't fault him. I would have done the same thing. I also notice how having one person at the head of a group causes bottlenecks. If it's a hierarchical system, leaders need to be available, or things have to wait for them. If the leader is wrong, then the entire enterprise can be brought to ruin. There is a long-standing argument for the idea that one person needs to be in charge. It goes way back to Adam Smith's writings in his book, The Wealth of Nations. Even Friedrich Engels agreed with Smith that a ship needs one captain. I certainly am not an expert on ships, and I hate to disagree with the luminaries of both capitalism and communism. However, this is at variance with my experience. The flat, participatory model we developed worked very well and completely suited my personality. I feel blessed to have worked under it for the main part of my career at Stanford. I can assure you that the model we developed worked better than the conventional alternatives that abound at Stanford. I strongly encourage listeners in academia, industry, and other fields to experiment and find an appropriate model for your own situations. If you can break the thrall of the conventional wisdom, you might find a management structure that strongly supports what you want to accomplish. Minimizing competition. You may not have a choice in how a group is led. Whenever there is a hierarchy of positions and pay scales, it's likely that you'll also encounter some people who will step on each other as they attempt to climb the ladder. You'll know them as the office gossips, the backstabbers, the users, the phonies. I encourage you to steer clear of this entire culture. I can't tell you that people like that don't wind up in high positions. They do, and too often. It's important to ask yourself what kind of satisfaction you'll derive from being that kind of person, even if it does mean you get the title you want. Don't lose sight of your humanity in the pursuit of a fancier car. Many businesses and academic organizations use competition as a means of encouraging people to do their best. They literally have contests, sales contests, design contests, etc., pitting people against each other. Although our culture is habituated to winner-take-all athletics and other zero-sum games, I'm not a fan of this. While it can have a strong upside for the winner, it has a strong downside for everyone else. It can lower morale, foster jealousy, and hurt relationships. It's important to learn to be motivated to do your personal best, regardless of what happens around you. I have found that contests bring out the worst in students, whereas learning to cooperate and share brings out the best. If students are exposed to a learning environment where there is a strong mutually supportive teaching team as role models, and if they are given enough autonomy, they generate their own sense of excitement and commitment without the defeat and discouragement that is an inherent part of the contest mode. It is generally believed that contests are good motivators. I agree that they are. However, they are not the only motivators. We regularly get extremely high student motivation for, and draw large crowds of spectators to, project presentations that are the result of cooperation rather than competition. The positive motivational effects are just as good, without the destructive downside of contests. Look for ways to be inclusive rather than competitive, for ways to help the whole team win rather than just one individual. As much as possible, it behooves you to erase the idea of competition in the workplace from your mind. Competition leads to backstabbing, gossip, and generally negative feelings, even if you succeed at what you set out to accomplish. Maybe you'll get the raise, however you'll also lose friendships, and may ever after feel that you have to watch your back. Power dynamics often lead to this competition. When there are multiple levels or layers in an organization, you may have a boss and a boss's boss, and so on. Maybe a coworker has more clout than you do, or is making more money. This is all meaningless. In life, real life, none of that matters. You have to be satisfied only with yourself, not worried about what the Joneses are up to. One great way that we get rid of power struggles is by going for walks together. See, if I have a meeting with a colleague in my office, then I'm the one with power, and vice versa if the meeting is in her office. Instead, we walk. The hierarchy is gone. Whenever you can, eliminate situations in which one person is sitting behind a desk. The desk creates distance and a power imbalance that can make the other person feel self-conscious and less than. Meet on neutral ground as equals. Rethinking a private office. In the engineering school at Stanford, every professor has a closed-off room known as his private office. I had the standard relationship with my private office for 43 years, and I was happy with the situation. My office housed my vast collection of books, theses, and off-prints of technical papers. It also housed all my paper files and was decorated with framed pictures of a long-ago trip to Chiapas, Mexico. In addition, there was a collection of mechanical models that I used in my lectures to amuse visitors and to remind me of some past experience. Then, I got involved in the D School, and my relationship to my office changed. There are no private offices at the D School, just open bullpen arrangements. It was like the space I shared with other lecturers at the City College of New York when I had my first teaching job, and the space I shared with other PhD students at Columbia University. It's hardly the prestigious office that a chaired senior full professor expects. Yet, I found that I spent more and more time in the D School staff space and less in my private office. This arrangement went on for over 4 years. Then, 2 major events occurred in my life. After 4 moves, the D School finally landed in its permanent home, and the building that held my private mechanical engineering design group office was condemned. A new, smaller private office was assigned to me in a separate wing of the same building that now houses the D School. I donated my collection of books and research documents to a special library at the University of California, Davis, and moved the rest of my possessions into my new private office. I hardly ever go there. Instead, I lend it to individuals with critical space needs. I spend all my time at the D School. At the D School, there are now not even partitions between people's spaces. A staff of more than 20 shares one common, unobstructed space, outfitted with a few desks, many shelf-like desktops, portable files, and desktop computers. There is no hierarchy that determines who sits where, and there is periodic spontaneous shifting of home bases. When we first moved into the permanent D School space, we had just hired a woman named Kim to be our chief financial person. Previously, she had worked for many years in the dean's office, and she was very familiar with the Stanford finance system. After 2 weeks, she told me that she was finding it difficult to do her work in the open D School space. I immediately responded that I could solve her problem. We purchased a new desktop computer for her and set her up in my private office. I gave her my office key and assured her she would be the only person using that office. After about 10 days, I noticed Kim was back at her original computer station in the open space community office. She never went back to the private office. Once she had experienced the feelings of camaraderie, she could not go back to the old seclusion of the private office. It was too isolating for her. I knew just how she felt. We eventually moved the computer out of the private office and into our common space. I wonder if the computer also felt a sense of relief. Before we moved to the open floor plan, I had been in private offices my entire professional life. I now realize how much better equipped the D-School is for individual and group relations. It also does wonders for information flow and communications. When I come into work, it feels very much like coming home to my family. But we do, of course, all have times when we need to think or work without interruptions. When that happens, there's a simple signal. We put on headphones, and then everyone knows not to bother us. We can also remove ourselves from that space and go into one of the private rooms if we need quiet. If you have any input into your workspace, try opening it up to a more non-hierarchical setup. Give yourself some time to get used to it, and then see if you work better in a collaborative environment. Space and body language. Physical position is very important. Unless I am giving a theater-style lecture, my favorite teaching arrangement is to have everyone sit in a circle. Moreover, I insist on the circle being as small and as perfectly round as possible. The closer the people are to each other physically, the better the group functions. I have conducted many experiments with all sorts of groups, and the results are overwhelmingly in favor of very tight circles. This falls in line with the design thinking concept of radical collaboration. A circle means there's no hierarchy of who sits where. There are no good seats, bad seats, or preconceived notions about the types of people who sit in front, who we would call the brown-nosers, or back, who we'd call the class clowns and slackers. It means that we're all looking at each other, encouraging eye contact and connections among people. Changing the circle's diameter changes the feeling in the group in a very palpable way. If we want everyone to participate, then no one can be left out physically. Everyone needs to be on the same level. If someone sits back a little from the circumference, she is left out emotionally as well as physically. And those too far inside exclude others by blocking their view of fellow participants. If you find yourself on the periphery of a group and notice that you feel left out, try moving to a more central location. Chances are you'll feel more involved in what is going on. Change your location, and you will change how you feel about the event you're attending. When you have trouble really engaging or working on a goal, see if your location is supporting or hindering your efforts. It's hard to get noticed at work if you're always sitting closest to the exit, and it's more likely you'll put in more effort in your workout class if you're in the instructor's sightline. I am often in a situation in which students working on the same project sit in a group of 4 or more around a small table. If one of the students does not seem to be participating much, and her chair is farther away from the table than the other students, I gently push that student's chair inward so that she is physically an integral part of the group. That change usually results in much greater participation from the former outlier. Be aware of your body and what it's telling you. If you like what it's saying, keep doing what you're doing. If you don't like what it's saying, move it to the position where it says what you like. Large meetings provide classic examples of the importance of physical position. They often take place in conference rooms where there is one big rectangular table that everyone sits around. If the table is long, it's difficult to see most of the other people on your side of the table. If people don't see each other, the effectiveness of their communication is diminished. If one person is running the meeting or perceived as more important than the others, there is an implicit authority associated with how close you sit to that person. If you want to strengthen your voice in the meeting, sit as close to the authority figures as possible and opposite the people you want to influence. If you want to hide, sit on the same side of the table and as far as possible from the people you want to hide from. It's even easier to disappear if the room is so crowded that you can take a back row seat and not sit at the table at all. If you have no one to hide from, and you want to have a fully participatory meeting, it's much better to abandon the rectangular conference table in favor of a circular arrangement where everyone can see and be seen by all of the other participants. Your physical position at a meeting influences both your effectiveness and your state of mind. Working in a supportive physical environment is a huge plus, as students in the Stanford D-School know well. A book about the school, titled Make Space, refers to some of the key factors in providing a space to promote creative learning in learning by doing situations. It is interesting to look at attitudes about the D-School type of space. People seeing it for the first time immediately think of it as being a creative space. So do the students. It's as if the space is talking to them, saying, "Hey, the expectations here are different from those in the rest of the university." When we were designing the space, there were often arguments between the D-School team and the people who managed space renovations for the university. I recall being told several times, "It may be good for you guys, but who will want to use it if you leave the building?" It turns out, almost everyone wants it.